In the spring of 1917, nestled among the rolling hills of Fatima, Portugal, an extraordinary event quietly began. The countryside was peaceful, its rhythm set by the rustling of olive trees and the distant bleating of sheep. Among the families who worked the land were three humble children, Lucia dos Santos and her cousins Francisco and Jacinta Marto. Each day, they led their small flock across the fields, unaware that their lives were about to become part of something far greater than themselves. One afternoon, as they guided their sheep through a familiar pasture, the sky suddenly burst with a brilliant flash of light. There was no sound, no warning, just a sudden radiance that shimmered across the blue sky. Moments later, another flash followed. Startled, the children looked upward, and there before them stood a lady clothed in white. Her light was unlike anything they had ever seen, purer and more radiant than sunlight itself, as if a crystal cup had been filled with the clearest water and held to the burning rays of the sun. She spoke gently, asking them to return to the same place each month. In October, she said, she would reveal who she was and what she desired. And she promised she would perform a miracle so that all might see and believe. Lucia, the eldest of the three, wished to keep this vision secret. But Jacinta, who was known to speak freely and with great feeling, could not keep it to herself. When she returned home, she told her family what they had seen. Word of the children's story quickly began to spread through the village. Many were skeptical. After all, they were only children. Could such a claim be trusted? Yet those who questioned them found something curious. No matter how many times they were asked, or by whom, the children's stories never wavered. Their accounts remained consistent, and what was more, their sincerity could not easily be dismissed. As the weeks passed, curiosity grew into quiet anticipation. People across Portugal began to turn their thoughts toward a single date, October 13th. It was the day the lady had promised a miracle, a sign that all could witness with their own eyes. Though many still wondered what might happen, hope began to stir in the hearts of the faithful. On the night before the 13th, a powerful storm swept across the hills of Fatima. Rain poured from the sky and wind rushed through the valleys, as if nature itself was trying to silence the moment. But the people were not deterred. Despite the harsh weather, tens of thousands made the journey to the Cova area, the place where the lady had first appeared to the children. They came from every direction, walking for miles through mud and cold. Some carried umbrellas, others wrapped themselves in blankets, all united by one purpose: to witness what had been foretold. When the morning of October 13th arrived, the rain began again. The skies opened, and the earth beneath them turned to water and clay. Yet the crowd stood firm. In that moment, the lady appeared once more to the three children. Lucia, moved by both reverence and wonder, asked her what she desired. The lady answered with gentleness and clarity. She said that a chapel was to be built on that very spot in her honor. She revealed her identity with a name that would become familiar to millions. I am the Lady of the Rosary. She urged them to continue praying the Rosary every single day. And then came a promise filled with comfort. She said the war would come to an end, and that the soldiers would soon return home. Then her tone grew solemn. Lucia later recalled how the lady's face turned sorrowful, her voice full of concern. She gave a final message, one that reached beyond time and place. "Do not offend the Lord our God any longer," she said, "for he is already too deeply offended." It was not a threat, but a call to awaken. A plea from a mother's heart, urging the world to return to what is good, to what is sacred, before it is forgotten. Then, the lady opened her hands, and a light radiated from them with a brilliance beyond earthly comparison. As she rose into the sky, her light seemed to reflect upon the sun itself, as if heaven and creation had become momentarily united. And when she vanished from sight, something extraordinary happened. The dark rain clouds that had blanketed the sky suddenly parted. From behind them, the sun emerged, but not as it was usually seen. It appeared as a disk of light, spinning rapidly, casting waves of color across the landscape. Shades of red, blue, yellow, and violet danced over the crowd and across the earth, as if the sky itself had been transformed into a living canvas. Tens of thousands stood in awe. Some wept, others shouted in wonder, and many fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the sight above them. The sun, though bright, did not burn the eyes. It was described as soft, silvery, and strange, moving in ways no one had ever witnessed before. According to many accounts, the sun seemed to tremble and then suddenly plunge toward the earth, causing a wave of fear to sweep through the crowd. Just as quickly, it zigzagged back to its place in the sky. And then, another detail emerged, subtle, but no less astonishing. The people who had arrived soaked to the bone, standing for hours in rain and mud, realized that their clothes were now completely dry. The ground beneath them, moments earlier waterlogged, had also dried in an instant. This moment would come to be known as the miracle of the sun. A moment witnessed not by a few in secret, but by thousands in the open, all gathered in hope, and all left forever changed. Only moments earlier, the ground had been soaked and trampled by thousands of feet. Mud clung to shoes, and water had pooled in every low place. Yet after the miracle, something remarkable had taken place. Eyewitnesses described how the ground, once heavy with rain, had dried almost instantly. Clothes that had been drenched only minutes before now looked clean and untouched. One witness, named Dominic Rise, would later remark that the garments appeared as though they had just returned from the cleaners. But perhaps most astonishing of all was the scale of the phenomenon. The strange movement of the sun was not witnessed by only those gathered at the Cova da Iria. Reports came in from as far as 15 to 25 miles away. Farmers, townspeople, and travelers who had no connection to the children or the apparitions described seeing the same solar display from distant hills and valleys. The wide reach of the event made one thing clear. This was no trick of the mind, no product of imagination or suggestion. The idea of mass hallucination or hypnotism simply could not explain what so many had seen from so many different places. In the days that followed, the atmosphere changed. Those who had doubted the children's stories began to ask new questions. Skeptics who had once dismissed the events as fantasy now found themselves reconsidering. Even some who had been critical of the church began to acknowledge that something deeply mysterious had taken place, something that defied explanation and stirred the heart to belief. In the days that followed October 13, 1917, the quiet hills of Fatima were no longer a hidden corner of Portugal. The windswept fields where 3 shepherd children had once tended sheep had become the center of global attention. What had happened in the Cova da Iria was now being spoken of in towns, cities, and even foreign countries. Something had shifted, not only in the soil of Fatima, but in the hearts of those who had seen and heard. News of the solar phenomenon spread quickly. Local newspapers that had once dismissed the children's claims as superstition or childish imagination were now publishing detailed reports from eyewitnesses. Journalists who had come to mock left bewildered. People who had arrived with doubt returned home with stories they could not explain. Some newspapers referred to the event as the miracle of the sun. Others chose more cautious headlines, but even they could not deny that something remarkable had occurred. The scale of the crowd, estimated to be between 30,000 and 70,000 people, meant that testimonies came from every class and corner of society. Peasants and professors alike described the same extraordinary vision. Some spoke of fear when they saw the sun seem to rush toward the earth. Others recalled a deep peace that filled them as the lights danced across the sky. A few fainted, many wept, and all stood changed by what they had witnessed. But alongside the wonder, questions emerged. What had really happened? Could such a thing be explained by science? Was it a trick of the light or an atmospheric phenomenon? Or had it truly been a sign from heaven, a miracle granted not in secret, but in the open to thousands of eyes? Scientists, skeptics, and scholars began to examine the reports. Some suggested natural explanations, such as optical illusions caused by staring at the sun for too long. Others proposed that strange weather conditions may have produced the effect. But these theories struggled to explain how people miles away from the cova had seen the same thing, at the same time, from different angles and under different weather conditions. The theory of mass hallucination quickly lost ground. Too many had seen too much, too clearly, for the event to be dismissed so easily. The Church, cautious by nature, did not rush to declare the event a miracle. In matters of supernatural claims, the Catholic Church traditionally moves slowly, gathering evidence and seeking clarity over time. Local bishops began to investigate, interviewing witnesses, reviewing press reports, and examining the consistency of the testimonies. The children themselves were questioned again, this time with greater seriousness and care. Despite the mystery surrounding the event, the people of Portugal had already made up their minds. Pilgrims began to arrive by the hundreds, then by the thousands. The Cova da Iria, once a simple pasture, became a place of prayer and pilgrimage. People brought candles, flowers, and rosaries. They knelt in silence or sang hymns as they stood on the soil where something holy had taken place. Small chapels were erected, first from wood, then in stone. Devotion grew not by force, but by faith. The three children, Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta, were swept into a storm of attention. They had never sought fame or recognition. Their lives had been simple, defined by family, work, and prayer. But now, strangers came to ask them questions, to touch their hands, to pray with them. Lucia, the oldest, often spoke on behalf of the group. Francisco and Jacinta, more reserved, remained quietly faithful. The pressure of the public eye was heavy, but their resolve did not waver. They continued to speak of what they had seen, never changing their story, never asking for anything in return. In the months that followed, many who had previously mocked the children now offered apologies. Some of the most outspoken critics became silent, or even joined the growing crowds at the cova. Others remained skeptical, but admitted they could no longer explain away what had occurred. The division between believer and doubter did not vanish, but it was no longer marked by laughter or scorn. Something had happened in Fatima, and even those who refused to call it a miracle could not deny that it was real. By early 1918, the effects of the event had begun to ripple beyond Portugal. Letters from foreign pilgrims arrived. Articles were translated into different languages. Photos of the crowd, of the field, and of the young seers circulated through Europe. The world, still deep in the tragedy of war, found in Fatima a strange and unexpected light. Here was a story not of violence, but of prayer, not of conquest, but of a message, a quiet call to conversion, to hope, and to peace. Yet with all the attention came further scrutiny. Government authorities, some hostile to the church, attempted to silence the movement. At one point, the children were even taken into custody and threatened. But their answers never changed. They were not inventing stories. They were simply telling what they had seen. And over time, public sympathy shifted even more in their favor. The sight of the apparitions continued to grow in significance. Pilgrimages increased. Accounts of prayers answered, of healings and conversions, began to circulate. The sense that Fatima was not just a place, but a message, grew stronger. The miracle had not ended on the 13th of October. It had only begun. the Church would eventually affirm the supernatural character of the apparitions. Years of investigation led to a careful conclusion that the events at Fatima were worthy of belief. Not forced, not required, but offered, as heaven so often offers its signs, to those who are willing to see. What began with a flash of light in the sky had become something more. Fatima was now a place where the boundary between the visible and the invisible seemed to thin. A place where ordinary people had seen something extraordinary, and a place where, even today, millions still walk in silence, searching for the same presence that once appeared to 3 children in the fields of Portugal. Though the crowds returned to their homes and the fields of Fatima slowly regained their stillness, the lives of the 3 children were changed forever. What they had witnessed could not be forgotten, and what they had experienced would shape every day that followed. Lucia dos Santos, Francisco Marto, and Jacinta Marto were no longer simply shepherd children. They had become the center of one of the most talked about spiritual events in modern history. Yet despite the growing attention from pilgrims, press, and religious authorities, the children themselves remained strikingly humble. They did not seek fame, and they did not behave as though they had been chosen. In fact, they often seemed overwhelmed by the attention, retreating into silence and simplicity, rather than embracing the spotlight. Francisco, the older of the 2 Marto siblings, was known for his gentle and contemplative nature. He was quiet even before the apparitions, and afterward he became even more inward. Though he had seen the lady and the miracle, he had not heard her words as clearly as the others. For him, what remained most deeply was her presence, a presence he described as beautiful, peaceful, and filled with light. After the apparitions, Francisco spent much of his time in prayer. He would often slip away to the church to sit quietly before the tabernacle. He wanted, he said, to console Jesus for the offenses of the world. He did not speak often, but when he did, his words reflected a deep awareness of the sacred. There was a stillness about him, a kind of spiritual maturity far beyond his age. Sadly, Francisco's time on earth would be brief. In the months following the apparitions, both he and his sister Jacinta fell ill during the great influenza epidemic that swept through Europe after the war. As his strength faded, Francisco bore his suffering with remarkable calm. He did not complain. He did not fear. When asked how he felt, he would smile and say, "I am going to heaven." He died on April 4, 1919, at the age of 10. He had asked to receive Holy Communion before he passed, and he did so with quiet joy. Those who were with him said he looked at peace, his face serene. Francisco had fulfilled what he felt was his mission, to offer his prayers for the world and to live in friendship with God. Jacinta, though younger, displayed a strength that surprised many. She had always been more expressive than her brother, tender-hearted and full of emotion. But after the apparitions, something in her changed. Like Francisco, she became deeply devoted to prayer and sacrifice. She wept often for those who did not believe in God and spoke frequently of the need to pray for sinners. Her concern was not for herself, but for others, especially those who were far from faith. Her illness lingered longer than Francisco's. She suffered greatly, undergoing surgeries and long hospital stays, often without the comfort of family nearby. Yet even in pain, she remained steadfast. Nurses and doctors who cared for her were struck by her patience, her kindness, and the strength of her spirit. She would offer her suffering quietly, saying it was for the love of Jesus, for the conversion of sinners, and in reparation for the offenses committed against the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Jacinta died on February 20th, 1920, at the age of 9. Alone in a hospital room far from home, she passed into eternity with the same quiet dignity that had marked her final months. She had once said that Mary told her she would die alone, but that she should not be afraid. And when the moment came, she was ready. Lucia, the eldest of the three, was left to carry the memory of Fatima for the rest of her life. After the deaths of her cousins, she entered religious life, joining a convent where she would spend decades in prayer and reflection. Over the years, she would be asked to write down everything she remembered about the apparitions, including the messages and visions they had received. Lucia's life was not easy. Though she had been chosen to carry a message of hope, she often carried the weight of disbelief, misunderstanding, and even criticism. Still, she remained faithful. Her writings were marked by clarity, humility, and a deep understanding of the spiritual significance of what had happened in Fatima. She would later speak of additional visions and communications she received in her years as a nun, including messages that would become known as the Secrets of Fatima revelations concerning the future of the Church and the world. But at the heart of everything she shared was the same call to prayer, to repentance, and to trust in the mercy of God. Lucia lived a long life, dying in 2005 at the age of 97. She witnessed nearly an entire century pass since the day she stood in the fields of Fatima, and yet she never moved far from its message. Her life was a quiet testimony to endurance, to obedience, and to the power of faith lived in silence. The lives of these three children offer something rare and beautiful. In a time of global upheaval, during war and disease, in a world marked by uncertainty, they responded with unwavering trust. They did not become scholars or leaders or public figures. They simply became faithful, and through them, a light was carried that continues to shine more than a century later. Their journey was not one of glory, but of grace. In their innocence, they became messengers. In their suffering, they became witnesses. And in their ordinary lives, they revealed something extraordinary, that God can speak through the smallest voices, that heaven can reach even the humblest of hearts, and that true holiness is often found not in words, but in love. The apparitions at Fatima were not only about what was seen, but about what was spoken. Though the miracle of the sun captured the world's attention, it was the message behind the light that truly gave Fatima its lasting significance. It was a message not bound to a single moment in time, but one that reached across generations, a quiet and urgent call to prayer, repentance, and hope. From the beginning, the Lady of the Rosary came not with grand declarations, but with a mother's concern. She appeared to three simple children, not to astonish the world, but to awaken it. Her words were few, her manner gentle, but her message was clear. The world, she said, had strayed from God, and unless it turned back, it would face consequences not of punishment, but of separation, a spiritual emptiness that would lead to sorrow. At the heart of her message was the call to conversion. She asked for people to return to the sacraments, to live lives rooted in faith, and to seek God not only in moments of crisis, but in the quiet rhythm of everyday life. She spoke of the Rosary not as a ritual, but as a spiritual lifeline, a way to reflect on the life of Christ, to unite with his suffering, and to draw strength in a troubled world. Each time she appeared, the Lady urged the children to pray the Rosary daily. It was not a suggestion, but a plea. She said that through the Rosary, peace could be restored, wars could be prevented, and hearts could be healed. It was a simple request, but one that carried deep spiritual power. She also called for reparation. This word, unfamiliar to many today, means an offering made in love to repair what has been wounded. In the message of Fatima, reparation was directed especially toward the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary, symbols of divine love that had been ignored, mocked, and forgotten. The Lady asked that people make sacrifices, even small ones, with love and humility, offering them for the good of others and for the healing of the world. One of the most sobering parts of the Fatima message was the vision of hell shown to the children. It was not a metaphor or abstract image, but a vivid and frightening glimpse into the reality of eternal separation from God. The children were deeply shaken by what they saw, and it left a lasting impression on them. But even this vision was not meant to inspire fear alone. It was a reminder of what is at stake when souls are lost to indifference or sin. And it was accompanied immediately by the assurance that God's mercy is always near, always waiting for those who turn back to Him. The lady spoke of war, warning that unless the world repented, a second and more terrible conflict would follow the one that was then coming to an end. She also spoke of the errors that would spread from certain nations, leading to the suffering of the innocent and the persecution of the faithful. These were not political predictions, but spiritual warnings, reminders that when a society forgets God, it opens the door to confusion, violence, and despair. Yet even in these warnings, the lady offered hope. She promised that in the end, her immaculate heart would triumph. This was not a political victory or a worldly conquest, but a triumph of love and truth. It would come through the quiet transformation of hearts, through the prayers of the faithful, and through the grace of God working in hidden and humble ways. Central to this promise was the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. The lady asked that this consecration be made in union with the Pope and the bishops of the world. She said that if this was done, Russia would be converted and peace would follow. If not, the errors would spread, leading to great suffering. Over the decades, this part of the message became a point of deep reflection and debate within the Church. Popes prayed for guidance. Consecrations were made. Many believed that the act had been fulfilled in spirit, even if the precise form evolved over time. But the deeper meaning remained unchanged. The world must be entrusted to God through the heart of Mary. Only by returning to divine grace could true peace be restored. The message of Fatima is not one of despair, but of invitation. It invites every person to take seriously the spiritual life, to recognize the urgency of the times, and to respond with courage and faith. It speaks not only to nations, but to each human soul. It reminds us that history is shaped not only by politics or economics, but by the quiet choices of the heart, choices to love, to forgive, to pray, and to believe. Fatima's message continues to resonate because it is rooted in timeless truths. It is a message for parents and children, for priests and leaders, for those who believe and those who struggle. It is a message that says heaven is not distant. It is near, reaching out through a mother's voice, through the eyes of 3 children, and through the stillness of prayer. More than a century has passed since that quiet morning in 1917, but the light of Fatima has not dimmed. It still shines in chapels and churches, in whispered rosaries and silent acts of penance. It lives in the hearts of the faithful who choose to carry its message forward not with fear, but with love. For those who listen, Fatima remains a guide, a reminder that God does not abandon the world, even when it forgets Him. A sign that in the darkest of times, a single prayer can light the path, and a promise that in the end, love will conquer all. Over 100 years have passed since 3 children walked into a field and encountered a light not of this world. The world around them has changed in ways they could never have imagined. Wars have come and gone. Nations have risen and fallen. Generations have searched for meaning in the noise of progress. And yet, through all the turbulence of history, the message of Fatima has endured. It has endured not because of spectacle, but because of its truth. It was not just the sun that moved that day in Portugal. It was the hearts of those who witnessed it. And the ripple of that moment has not faded. It continues in the lives of those who pause to listen, to reflect, and to respond. The Church, after years of prayerful investigation, recognized the authenticity of the apparitions. Fatima was declared worthy of belief, not as a demand, but as an invitation. Popes have honored it. Millions have made pilgrimages to its sacred grounds. and the humble children who once knelt in the fields were later recognized by the Church for the purity of their lives and the depth of their faith. Francisco and Jacinta were canonized as saints, and Lucia's path toward sainthood continues, shaped by a lifetime of devotion and witness. But the heart of Fatima is not a shrine or a statue or a miracle frozen in time. The heart of Fatima is a call to return to God with sincerity, to embrace prayer as a daily offering, and to live with humility and courage in a world that often forgets what is eternal. For those who visit the Cova da Iria today, there is still a quiet wind that moves through the olive trees. Pilgrims arrive by foot, by bus, by plane. Some carry candles, others carry questions. They come from different languages and lands, yet they are drawn by something deeply human: the longing for peace, the desire for meaning, the hope for mercy. And there, in that place where the heavens once opened, they find what the children once found. Not answers to every mystery, not escape from every trial, but something greater. They find a presence. They find a promise. They find the tender voice of a mother who still calls the world to remember her son. Fatima does not belong to the past. It is not a legend to be admired from a distance. It is a light still burning, a message still speaking. It tells us that even the smallest voices can echo across centuries, that even in the darkest hour, grace is never far, and that through prayer, through faith, through love, the world can be changed. So we are left with a question as quiet as the wind across the fields. What will we do with the light we have been given? Will we carry it forward? Will we let it guide us? The story of Fatima is not finished. It continues in you.